The conversation around the decline of the dollar has been increasing. Countries around the world have been reducing their reliance of not only the dollar, but the Western world as a whole. However, there are so many countries jumping on this strategy that it's really hard to determine who is a pretender and who's a contender when it comes to disrupting the dollar's dominance. So I thought it'd be fun to play a little game, but not just any game. This game is inspired by the craze that takes over North America in the month of March, and that is what's known as March Madness. Men's and women's college basketball teams compete in a 64-team bracket challenge to determine the winner of the basketball season, but it's not really about the basketball. It's about the bracket, picking who will win, who will lose, if David can slay Goliath. And it's all anyone can talk about for a couple weeks because everyone fills out a bracket. Your mom does a bracket, her hairdresser does a bracket, the hairdresser's son's teacher does a bracket. You get the point. So it only makes logical sense that we do our own bracket, trying to find the country with the greatest chance of disrupting the dollar and causing challenges for the United States economically. So without further ado, let's introduce the 16 contestants. These will be head-to-head battles between two countries. The winner goes to the next round, the loser gets sent home. In the Africa region, our number one seed is South Africa, a founding member of BRICS, which is the group of emerging countries led by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This group is the main force behind this de-dollarization movement. Also in the region are new BRICS members, Ethiopia and Egypt, along with Nigeria. At the beginning of 2024, BRICS invited 5 new countries, Egypt and Ethiopia, along with Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. What a great transition to our next region, which is the oil-producing region, led by Saudi Arabia, and includes the United Arab Emirates, Russia, and Iran. Moving on to the Latin American region with Brazil as the top seed. It also includes some very interesting names like Venezuela, Mexico, and Argentina. And our final region consists of Asian countries. China is the top seed here, but it also includes their frenemy India, as well as Indonesia and Turkey, which is the region that we're going to start with. But before we do, let me know down in the comments which country you think out of those 16 are going to win. Our first matchup in the Asia region is number 2 seed India versus number 3 seed Indonesia. On paper, this doesn't seem like a fair fight. India currently has the 5th largest economy in the world, has good relationships with the West, but is also one of the main drivers towards being more autonomous away from the West and intermediary currencies like the dollar. But don't sleep on Indonesia, the 5th largest economy in Asia, 4th largest population in the world, and one of the handful of countries expected to see significant economic growth over the next couple decades. They have also joined the ideology of reducing their reliance on the dollar. In fact, they have created a task force to expand the use of local currencies in Indonesia and partner countries. But in terms of this exercise, having India as their opponent in the first round was a tough draw. So India will win and move on to the next round, where they will face the winner of China versus Turkey. What can I say about China? Sure, they've experienced an economic slowdown due to their housing crisis, banking challenges, and aging population, but let's pump the brakes a little bit on all the headlines that their economy is collapsing. Economic slowdowns and economic collapses are two very different things. But for now, China is still the 2nd largest economy in the world, still the world's factory, and still has great influence in almost every region of the world. Let's be honest, Turkey had no chance in this matchup. I just put them in the bracket to share this video on the internet of their president having ice cream with Russia's president. Just like the basketball version of March Madness, not every team that plays deserves to be there, so China easily moves on. India and China, battle of the frenemies, and a right to be crowned the winner of the Asia region with a trip to the final 4 countries on the line. The general perception is China is on the way down and India is on the way up, with countries and companies looking to de-risk themselves away from China. The first place they often look is to India. India is lifting restrictions that have made it harder to do business there in the past and are looking for higher quality jobs in each of its booming sectors. Although India's ties to the West have strengthened, they have also been at the forefront of using local currencies, like trading for oil with the United Arab Emirates in either the Indian rupee or the UAE dirham. These transactions in the past have almost exclusively used the dollar. But the truth is, China is still very much ahead of India in many different categories like manufacturing, artificial intelligence, investments into other countries, and have their own motivations to use less of the dollar. So China wins this head-to-head matchup and will go to the Final Four. Let's move on to the Latin American region, where our first matchup is Brazil versus Argentina. A very interesting matchup indeed. The bordering countries have had an interesting year. Relations were good until Argentina elected a new president at the end of 2023, and now there seems to be an awkward relationship. Brazil is deeply entrenched in this dollar reduction movement, obviously a founding member of BRICS, and I think it would surprise many people to find out that Brazil is one of the top oil producers in the world. At the beginning of 2024, they officially joined OPEC+, which stands for the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. This is significant since oil transactions have almost exclusively been made in dollars, but that trend has been changing, and Brazil could have a larger impact on the petrodollar and just more influence globally. Argentina, in the meantime, has struggled with record high inflation, and new leadership is looking to transition its country's currency to the dollar to help stabilize its economy at a time when most of the world is doing the opposite. So Brazil wins this matchup. Our next matchup is the 3-seed Mexico versus 2-seed Venezuela. Venezuela has been increasing their relationships with countries most motivated to move away from the dollar, countries like China and Russia. They seem like a good fit to join BRICS in their next expansion window, and they fit the narrative of powerful energy supplier and producer. Many of you might be questioning why Mexico is even in this bracket in the first place, but if we're going to talk about which country could have the largest negative impact on the dollar, they have to be considered. They do share a border with the largest economy in the world, which has worked out for Mexico economically. Mexico, the United States, and Canada have a free trade agreement where any trade between those three countries makes cost as efficient as possible. Now, if Mexico were to do something to jeopardize that, like join BRICS or start using less dollars, for example, there could be a significant short-term pain, but the long-term gain could be intriguing, so Mexico is advancing to the next round. That gives us Brazil and Mexico in the Latin American final, and the winner gets to take on mighty China. This is going to be a tough matchup, especially when you size them up next to each other. Both countries are positioned well for global trade. When it comes to oil production, Brazil is 9th, Mexico is 12th. For natural gas production, Mexico is 17th, Brazil is 28th. Even their population rank is close, with Brazil edging out Mexico. So while Brazil has the advantage on paper and technically have a head start when it comes to reducing their reliance on the dollar, I think Mexico has higher potential than what Brazil can offer. Mexico is the second largest trade partner to the United States, just behind Canada and right in front of China, and we'd have to scroll all the way down to 16th to find Brazil. So imagine if Mexico flips the script on the US and immediately starts slowing down transactions with them and focuses more on autonomy away from the dollar and jumps on this local currency bandwagon. Now, do I think this is going to happen? No. But the country does have an election this year, and who knows, their philosophy could change. I know this will not be a popular decision, so feel free to roast me down in the comments, but Mexico is the first big upset of the bracket and is heading to the Final Four. Moving on to the oil region. These countries, I'll tell you right now, could have the largest impact on the dollar. For so long, the dollar has been tied to oil transactions known as the petrodollar. For countries to buy or sell oil, they needed to hold dollars, but times are changing and countries are starting to trade for oil in local currencies. We've seen it between Saudi Arabia and China, the UAE and India, and Russia has had to pivot their dollar strategy, but for other reasons. So with that said, let's start with the top-seeded Saudi Arabia and the number 4 seed Iran. But before we get into that, if this is your first time here, my name is Chris, and I make videos about world news impacting the dollar, so if you like topics like this and want to see more of them, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Iran is obviously a large oil producer in their own right, but they've been such a heavily sanctioned country for decades and stopped trading for oil in the dollar a long time ago. So any changes that they make already don't impact the dollar. So by default, we have to move Saudi Arabia on to the next round. They will be facing the winner of the Russia-UAE matchup, two powerhouses when it comes to oil production. As I just mentioned, Russia has had to pivot the dollar usage strategy due to sanctions put on it by the United States as well as the European Union. In a recent interview, Vladimir Putin said that before the war with Ukraine, Russia was using the dollar about 50% of the time for all transactions. And currently that has dropped down to 13% while relying more on the Russian ruble and Chinese yuan. This is something that has no end in sight, and it might be similar to the Iran situation where they are essentially removed from using the dollar, so how could they impact it? If this was 2 or 3 years ago, the Russia-UAE matchup would have been a lot closer, but I have to move UAE on to the next round. In the oil finals, we have Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. It's hard not to crown Saudi Arabia the largest oil disruptor of the dollar. The petrodollar started with them, but the question is, will it also end with them? We'll have to find out as they move on to the final four. Next up is the Africa region, starting with the first matchup, South Africa versus Nigeria. Now, South Africa is the top seed as they have been one of the leaders in attempting to reduce their reliance on the West, but their challenger, Nigeria, is probably the strongest 4 seed we have in this entire bracket. While Nigeria is not a member of BRICS, they've started to shift their strategy around using more local currencies. In fact, one of their country leaders said that they should start trading their oil in their currency to help boost their economy. The logic makes sense as Nigeria has the 15th largest oil production in the world, which is good enough to be the largest in Africa. They also have the largest economy and population in Africa. That's why I think it makes a ton of sense for BRICS to invite Nigeria and for Nigeria to accept. But let's see how they stack up against South Africa. When South Africa joined BRIC in 2010, I believe one of the factors was because they had the largest economy in Africa at the time, and there was belief that they would continue to grow. Their GDP actually fell from 2010 to 2022, which isn't very encouraging in regards to its growth potential. You also have to think that BRICS probably invited 2 new countries from Africa because South Africa has the smallest economy within the 5 founding BRICS members and likely the smallest global influence. In the biggest upset of the tournament so far, Nigeria is going to be moving on to the next round where they're going to be facing Egypt or Ethiopia, who were strategically invited to BRICS because of their location on a map. You can't make this up. Look where these 5 countries are located: Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, all in close proximity to each other, all of them except Ethiopia on the coast, making it easier for global trade, and one of them, Egypt, controlling one of the most important trade routes in the world, the Suez Canal. These waters will now be monitored by BRICS countries. Neither of these countries really have an amazing opportunity to disrupt the dollar in the near future, maybe as a collective group with BRICS, but for this matchup, I'm going to go with Egypt on the whim of they have better geography. So now it's Nigeria versus Egypt to become the Africa region champ. And I won't spend too much time on this because, as I just alluded to, I don't see much of an immediate path for Egypt to disrupt the dollar. And I see Nigeria much in the same vein as Mexico. If everything breaks right, they could become one of the biggest disruptors. Nigeria moves on to the final 4. 16 countries now down to 4. Let's head back to the right side of the bracket for our final 4 matchup between China and Mexico. And in order to discuss this one, we have to dig a little deeper. As I alluded to earlier, countries around the world have been de-risking themselves away from China, and they've been doing this by using 2 strategies. The first is called friendshoring. This is when countries look to move manufacturing to other countries in the region that they have better economic or political relationships with. If we use the United States as an example, this means moving manufacturing to countries like India, Vietnam, or Thailand. The second strategy is called nearshoring, and this is when countries are looking to move operations closer to the consumer base to avoid delays. And if we use the United States as an example again, this means moving operations to Latin America. And for the purposes of this video, Mexico has been one of the hotspots. But China has found the loophole. They've started to move operations into Mexico as well to be a little closer to their North American consumer base. But again, Mexico, United States, and Canada, they have a free trade agreement, so China has essentially Trojan horsed themselves into lower expenses. At the end of the day, not many countries can compete with China when it comes to dollar disruption, so they will go to the championship match and they will face either Saudi Arabia or Nigeria. Now, this matchup will be quick. Nigeria has made an amazing run through this bracket. They've taken down some of the top African countries. They've been the Cinderella of this year's bracket, right? But they didn't have a chance against Saudi Arabia, let's be honest. So Saudi Arabia versus China in the finals. But guys, now it's time to be honest with you. The country that actually has the best chance to disrupt the dollar wasn't even in the bracket. The United States has been really good with self-inflicted wounds, and right now they're headed down an unsustainable path, and to be honest, it might not even matter what any of these countries do. So to find out the problem that the United States has gotten themselves into, the new record that nobody wants, and how it impacts the rest of the world, I'll be linking a video for you in a second, but right now, back to the finals. China versus Saudi Arabia. Is this the final you expected? It probably should have been. Both countries are still very important to the United States. Yeah, even China. But let's assume the de-risking away from China continues. I mentioned the two strategies earlier, but really it could be seen as a smart economic move. China is no longer the best deal on the market anymore, with their manufacturing wages increasing over the last couple decades. But while low-end manufacturing is being relocated to cheaper places, China is still maintaining many higher-end processes. And while China's motivations to reduce the dollar's need might be stronger than any other country, Saudi Arabia seems to hold the higher importance for the United States. Imagine the panic that would occur in the United States if everyone woke up to a news alert saying that Saudi Arabia will no longer use the dollar for oil transactions, and then other oil producers follow suit, and then countries around the world no longer feel the need to hold dollars, which means they no longer are investing the extra dollars into the US stock market. Now, that's a lot of ifs, and I don't think that that's going to happen, but that's the kind of power that deserves to win this bracket. So congratulations to Saudi Arabia for being the country that has the most potential for dollar disruption. Now, the other video I promised you, it's right here.